You're listening to Formosa Files. I'm Eryk Michael Smith.
I'm John Ross.
And we are back for the last episode of the siege of Fort Zeelandia. So, last time around, we told you the first half of the story. The Dutch are being besieged by Kashinga and his Chinese forces, the Ming loyalist who's come over to find a new base from which to possibly overthrow the Qing dynasty, or if nothing else, set up a kingdom in Taiwan that's based on the Ming. So the Dutch have held out for over 4 months.
The Taiwan History Podcast, Formosa Files, is made possible through the generous sponsorship of the Frank C. Chen Foundation. Formosa Files.
Pretty impressive. A relief fleet has arrived. The Dutch have got like 700 reinforcements, which doubled their fighting men, so that's cool. But there's about 2,000 Dutch and other nationalities, European nationalities, besieged in Fort Zeelandia, and they are outnumbered something like 15 to 1. They reportedly still, at this point, have some hope, but where would this hope be coming from, John?
Let's answer that a bit later, but when we're talking about hope and despair in this story, it's largely from a Dutch perspective. Listeners might be wondering who we're rooting for. Who are the good guys, the bad guys? You go first.
Okay, let's put it this way. Kashinga started the fight. He's the invader. The Dutch are obviously the underdogs, so I don't know.
Kashinga is such a compelling figure, heroic, yet flawed. And then there are the local people in Taiwan. If we had a referendum...
Definitely, I would say Kashinga would win that vote.
For me, what matters most is that few stood against many. So I'm going with the Dutch. I admire their stubbornness. But also there's some selfish interest here in my like for counterfactual history. What would have happened if the Dutch had stayed on Taiwan?
Yeah.
I'm guessing right up to World War II, they would have been here.
Yeah, it is a fascinating idea to wonder what would have happened and what would have happened later on if Kashinga and his heirs had managed to hold on to Taiwan and their kingdom of Dongning, but we'll talk about that later. So I'm interested in the governor, right? The governor who was going to be fired, Koyet was his name. He was doing a decent job holding off Kashinga, but his superiors in Batavia had gotten some bad info, and they sent a letter of dismissal. However, if I was Governor Koyet, I don't know about you, would you have chosen to continue this fight?
I'd be looking to ally with the Qing forces. You've got a common enemy in Kashinga. If that didn't work out, I would have surrendered.
Yeah, what you said first makes a lot of sense. Allying with the new rulers in China, the Qing, right? So that would have been a smart or an interesting possible move. But yeah, a surrender, right? The Dutch are not actually colonizers in the strictest sense of the word. They don't have hundreds of thousands of people or troops on the island. It's more of a trading post.
Yes, it's something of an accidental colony, and the settlement grows. But yeah, at the end of the day, it's a post on the way to more important markets, Japan and China. And, it's not your home. You're not fighting for your home.
And as you noted, the Qing and the Dutch do have a common enemy, and that would be Kashinga. It makes sense to get on friendly terms with the Qing because not only is there this Kashinga problem, but they could have possibly started trading more with the new rulers. So one would expect the Dutch to at least consider the possibility of seeking help from the Qing forces.
They did, but not sufficiently. And it was something of a debacle. Kor, the commander of the relief fleet, he led this mission to China to try and form an alliance. But there was a lot of bickering. Who should go? What gifts to take? How many soldiers? Eventually, a small fleet goes out, but they're broken up in a storm. The flagship with Kor and the important people on board damaged. And he said that he couldn't go to China. He tried to return to Taiwan, but those northern winds made it impossible. So he heads back to Batavia and nothing comes off the mission.
I guess the Qing were still kind of busy with their own stuff over on China. We don't have any knowledge that they were thinking of coming over and doing anything about the situation on Taiwan at the time, do we?
It was on the cards, but where it was on their to-do list, I don't know.
Right. Okay, let's go back to the besieged castle or Fort Zeelandia in early autumn, right? So that Dutch relief fleet that you mentioned earlier, it had arrived with some reinforcements and supplies, including alcohol. And the Dutch are are encouraged, to say the least. They're in a stronger position to hold out and maybe wait for Qing help, but they're cut off from the rest of Taiwan. They have access to the sea, sort of, and as long as the fort walls hold out, they could, if they had enough food and could get stuff smuggled in or whatever, they could hold out for quite a while.
They could wait. Waiting would have been a better idea than what they do. They launch a naval and land attack. They go badly, very badly.
With their like 700, 800, 900 people.
They don't send that many men out, but no, they send a few hundred soldiers out.
But this is against Kashinga's many tens of thousands.
Yes.
Okay. Brave or stupid, you can pick your decision there.
Well, they thought in coordination with their navy, they could make a nice little quick attack and then go back to the castle. But yeah, it didn't work out. Do you remember that ship, the Maria?
Ah, of course. The Maria was there was a captain called Clausen or something, as I recall, and he was the captain of the Maria who decided that instead of hanging out and staying in the general area of Zeelandia, he would try to find some way back to modern-day Indonesia, Batavia, to try to get reinforcements.
Yes, Cornelius Clausen, he's one of the heroes of this whole story. So he comes back with the relief fleet and he insists on taking part in the naval attack, despite having injuries. He's captured by the Chinese. We don't know what happened to him exactly, but we can guess it wasn't pretty.
So after all of that work, he ended up losing his own life for the cause.
Yeah, history's not a movie script, is it?
No. So after this defeat, they've gone out and they've tried this Navy/military attack that is not working. The Dutch are licking their wounds back in Fort Zeelandia, but it must be pretty miserable in there. I mean, I've been to the part that remains, and it doesn't look all that large. I'm sure it was larger when it was complete, but it's like a football field in size, and they can't have much good food in there. The water must be going bad. And of course, they're running low on alcohol, definitely.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Things you don't think about. Firewood. You've got rice. How do you cook it without firewood? Yeah, so it's pretty hellish. People are coming down with disease, scurvy, beriberi, swollen, bleeding gums, dysentery. And a lot of the Dutch are very ill and they're dying. Quite large numbers too.
Yeah, not surprising. And it must have been just a feeling of hopelessness. Unless you were delusional, you must have felt extremely hopeless. And sieges, if you read about sieges throughout history, one of the things that's kind of you don't think about is they're very boring. You sit around for a really, really long time.
Sitting around, you probably chew over old grievances and bicker over the slightest thing, right?
Sure, yeah, a lot of infighting. But Kashinga does help to, you might say, relieve some of this boredom by deciding to launch an attack.
Yes, he launches an attack. It's repulsed, and so we go back to the state of boredom and deterioration in the fort.
Okay, and here in our story is when we get our exciting traitor that comes into the mix. We don't know all that much about him, right? But we do know his name. He was not Dutch. He was working with the Dutch East India Company. He was German, right? And
that's right.
His name is what? Hans-Jürgen Redus?
Yes, a German. Yeah, Governor Coet. Just to remind people, is Swedish. Yes,
right.
Very multinational. The Dutch East India Company.
So Redus.
One December morning,
Redus sneaks out of the castle, right?
That's right, and he has some vital information, vital knowledge that he's promising Kashinga.
Okay, a question I've always had is, what was the motivation for him turning traitor? One can assume he wanted food, a reward. He was tired of the boredom. What do we know?
Well, if we look at traitors through history, there's often a strong personality trait of egotism. So yeah, he probably had some grandiose ideas about his worth, and he resented his position or his treatment.
And he wasn't the only defector from Zeelandia, right?
That's right. A few others had run away.
I guess if you're really looking at, down the barrel of oblivion or whatever, it's not all that surprising that some people would get weak in the knees and decide that they're going to go over to the other side.
But what makes this Radis chap important is that he is a high-ranking military man. He's one of the highest in Fort Zeelandia. He knew their defenses very, very well. He knew the fort's weaknesses. And he was an experienced commander. He'd seen action in European wars. So he had a lot of expertise to share with Koxinga and his men.
We actually do have in Governor Koyet's own writing, he explained about this Radis traitor dude. And here's what he wrote. Radis directed Koxinga's attention to the hilltop redoubt behind the castle and pointed out the vulnerable castle walls beneath it. Those walls were so low that you could watch the soldiers inside from the redoubt. So it stood to reason that if Koxinga could capture the redoubt and take possession of the hill on which it stood, not a single soul in the walls could protect himself or even remain within them. So basically, he was able to very clearly point out a specific area of the castle that if Koxinga concentrated his efforts on this one little area, it would fall.
Yeah, so let's go over some of that. The redoubt, it's called Redoubt Utrecht, is a fortification, basically a mini fort, providing protection to the rear of Fort Zeelandia. And it's about 100 meters to the southwest of the main fort. Now, when Koyet mentions hills, these aren't really hills. We're talking hillocks. We're talking slightly elevated ground, but, that's still of value.
So why would Koxinga need a traitor named Radis to help point this obvious fact out to him?
Well, Koxinga, of course, thought that place was of value. He'd actually tried and failed to take it. But Radis just emphasized to him, he gave him the greater determination to keep trying to take it. And he told him how best to do it, how to build the attacking fortifications for the batteries, for your cannon, where to place them, how to build defenses for the cannon. So it's all a matter of meters, a few meters here, a few meters there, angles here, angles there, meticulous. And the Dutch can see what Radis is doing, but they don't have the manpower to go out and attack the fortifications, the batteries that they're building.
Oh, that must have been excruciating to be able to look out every single day and see them getting stronger and stronger and going, there's nothing we can do about this.
Yes, and the attack comes in January. There are 2 aborted attacks and then a final artillery bombardment of about 24 hours, if I remember.
Wow.
The redoubt is reduced to ruins and the Dutch forces leave.
24 hours of non-stop bombing and turning stone into pulverizing stone would be a way of putting it.
Yeah, so the Dutch withdraw to the main fort, leaving a booby trap of explosives, which kill many of the Chinese soldiers who occupy the fort in the morning.
Okay, so this is not a good way of, if you eventually surrender, it's not a good way of getting on the good side of the people who are about to conquer you.
It's always struck me as odd. If the redoubt falls, you're going to be looking at surrendering. The booby trap, explosive, not a good idea.
Yeah, again, as you said, stubborn people. So the redoubt has fallen and they're now holed up in their last little castle. It's time to surrender, is it not?
Yes, so they discuss surrendering, but strangely enough, it's not a unanimous vote.
Okay.
So a council meeting is held. They decide to start surrender negotiations. A couple of days later, Fort Zeelandia is formally surrendered after 9 months, and they sailed off on the 9th of February.
And it's quite amazing that Koxinga, after 9 months, and after him being quite generous early on, saying, hey, surrender, save us all a fight, and you can go with all your goods, your cash, your flags, whatever. But even after the 9 months of all of this murderous back and forth between the two sides, he still let them march out, according to what I've read, with drums beating, flags flying, holding their muskets, and basically unmolested.
Yes, quite cinematic. They march out unmolested to their ships and sail off.
There's very few cases that I can think of like this. Usually after a bloody siege, you get a massive massacre. That's the general end of things like this.
I guess that's why the surrender was not a unanimous vote. Quite a few of them must have thought.
They didn't believe him.
Right.
Interesting. So it's over. Our story has come to an end. Kashinga has won. Taiwan is no longer Dutch in any way. It is Chinese, and not Qing Chinese, but Ming Chinese in its own way. But not long before he evicts the Dutch, Kashinga had proclaimed the kingdom of Dongning. Kashinga is essentially making himself the new ruler of a Ming-style Chinese kingdom.
Yes, it's something of a hollow victory, though, isn't it? I mean, Kashinga had thought he would take possession of the fort in a matter of weeks. And through disease, starvation, and fighting, he's lost half of his original force.
Ouch. And also, his whole point in coming there was to retake the mainland, right? He wasn't originally planning on staying there for the rest of his life.
Yeah, so it's a costly distraction in many ways.
Right. So, holding out for 9 months, it's very impressive.
Yes, it's a glorious defeat, but it's also a costly one for them, isn't it? They lose well over half their men.
You said a hollow victory for Kashinga, but it didn't work out super well for Governor Coyet, even though he really deserved a ticker tape parade through the streets of Amsterdam or Batavia or something for what he had accomplished. But instead of that, he does not get anything close to a hero's welcome.
Not a hero's welcome in Batavia. All of the VOC, the Dutch East India Company employees, were punished. The ever greedy company fined them 6 months' pay.
Oh.
Now, you guys have just been sitting around a castle. You're lucky we don't dock you 9 months. The officers are stripped of rank and privilege. Coyet has it worst. He's imprisoned for 3 years, tried for treason, and found guilty.
Okay. And treason, back in the day, earned you a trip to the gallows or the block or whatever capital punishment method was popular at the time.
Yeah, I think they're just trying to make a statement. He was pardoned from execution. He's exiled to a remote island in the Spice Islands. He's released in 1674 and returned to Holland.
Does he ever get to explain his side of the story? Does he ever get any vindication before he dies?
Yes, he gets quite good revenge in the form of a book. He wrote a book called Neglected Formosa, published in Dutch, later translated into English, and he portrays the company leadership in that as self-centered and stupid. He blames the loss of Taiwan on them, their failure to heed his advice, their failure to provide proper defenses and adequate reinforcements. Now, something we haven't really emphasized with this siege is the usual situation of besieged fort when you're surrounded on all sides. And in this case, you've got sort of partial access to the sea, depending on conditions and the Chinese ships in the area. During this siege, there was always the possibility you could sail away in a ship.
Right, which has often been what commanders have done in the dead of night when they realized that things were not going to go their way. They've taken the gold from the castle and made their escape.
Yes, so all through this siege, some of the people in high position, some of the commanders, which we've talked about, are asking Coyet, I want to leave. I'd be of better service somewhere else.
Yeah.
And he's saying, no, you're staying here.
What about the traitor? What do we know about him?
Nothing. Well, he wasn't likely to write his memoirs, was he?
He also wasn't likely to return to Batavia.
Yes, I assume he stayed in Taiwan and was much despised by Kashinga's men.
Yeah.
Nobody likes a traitor, do they?
No. Kashinga himself also doesn't end up with a fairy tale ending.
No, he doesn't live past 6 months after taking Fort Zeelandia, but he's busy during that time. So he secures the fort, and his thoughts turn very quickly to expanding his control to the south. Get this, he sends an envoy to the Philippines demanding submission and a yearly tribute from the Spanish.
Is he going insane?
Yeah.
He's just barely managed to take Taiwan. He has his eye on retaking China and displacing a dynasty. And now he also wants the Spanish and the Philippines to send him a yearly tribute. He's getting
Spanish, the strongest European force and empire in the world. Yeah,
talk about getting a big head. That's pretty impressive.
Not much fun for the large Chinese population in Manila, is it? They suffer predictable persecution when this demand arrives in the Philippines.
Of course, the Spanish told him to get lost.
Absolutely. Koxinga is preparing a military expedition to teach the Spanish a lesson and kick them out when fate intervened and he departed this mortal coil. He dies in June 1662.
It's such a repeated story in history. I don't know, Alexander, this one, that one. They don't survive much longer than their 30s. They do their, great conquest and then they croak.
Yeah, so Koxinga is 38, I think. Yeah.
Okay. So did he die of natural causes, or was he stabbed in the back by some commander or Dutch sympathizer, or what happened?
It's usually given as cerebral malaria, a kind of malaria, but we don't know.
Malaria was a popular way to die back then.
Yes. It's slightly complicated by his erratic behavior in the final months, especially of his life.
Oh, yes. You're talking about that story of where Koxinga goes ballistic and orders the execution of his own son over some affair that the son had with some wet nurse or something. It was absolutely insane.
Trivial matter, yes, but he wanted his son killed. He wasn't, but it's an indication of his state of mind. Plus, as you mentioned, the taking on of the Spanish in the Philippines is not the smartest move, is it?
We can't rule out the possibility of one of those brain-wasting diseases like syphilis or something having been involved here.
Or if we're speculating, he must have had quite a few enemies. He's executed a lot of people. So poison, who knows? But yeah, cerebral malaria is the usual.
So 6 months after the glorious victory of taking Taiwan, our hero Koxinga croaks and he passes over his new kingdom of Dongning to his son.
There's a tussle. His son takes over about 6 months, 5 months after that.
And how long does he last as king of this kingdom of Dongning?
2 decades.
Oh, okay. So much more successful in a way than his father, at least on Taiwan.
It's interesting. This kingdom of Dongning, does it remind you of anything? These loyalists on Taiwan?
You mean, does the idea of people running away from China to escape new rulers and coming to Taiwan and there being a son and a father duo, does that remind me of anything? Yes, it does. Particularly things that happened after 1949.
So Chiang Kai-shek, with his nationalists here after 49, often talked about retaking the mainland, but he never tried it. But the kingdom of Dongning, Koxinga's son, launched 2 invasions and held territory on the mainland for a few years. This is in the 1670s, but lost and had to retreat to Taiwan.
And the grandson, how long did he last?
2 years, I think.
Oh, and then after that, the kingdom of Dongning faded into history.
That's right.
So we've now completed the, I think, rather fabulous story of the end of the Dutch, the siege of Fort Zeelandia, the arrival of Koxinga, and now we are getting ready for a decently long period of Qing rule. New masters are coming, and it's a new chapter for Taiwan. Thanks again for joining us on Formosa Files. I'm Eryk Michael Smith.
I'm John Ross. We'll see you in the next episode.